Welcome to Tales from Timber Creek, where stories flow like water in a mountain brook. Settle in, unwind, and let your mind wander. Here you'll find original stories told in a calm, soothing voice. Whether you're looking to relax after a long day or drift off to sleep, this channel offers a tranquil retreat from the noise of everyday life. So take a deep breath, relax, and stay a while. I have a story to tell you. The bench beneath the ash tree. In a small valley capped by low, patient hills, there stood a village called Briar Hollow. It was not marked on most maps, for it had never sought to announce itself to the world. It whispered instead, through split rail fences silvered by time, through the groan of barn doors at dawn, and through the steady knock of wood against wood as people shaped their days with their hands. At the edge of the village, where the road thinned from gravel to dust, and the dust to grass, an old ash tree spread its branches wide. Beneath it sat a bench, handmade decades ago, its planks bowed and polished smooth by weather and by use. The bench faced the valley as if it had been set there to watch rather than to wait. That bench belonged, in a way, to Amos Calder. Amos had not built it, though once he might have. He had built many things in his life: barns that still stood straight despite their age, stone walls that refused storms, tables broad enough for a feast and yet simple enough for ordinary bread. His hands had been known throughout Briar Hollow for their steadiness. When something leaned, he squared it. When something broke, he fixed it. But hands, like wood, change with time. Amos was 78 when he first began to feel, well, useless. It was a harsh word, heavy as a soaked coat. He didn't say it loud at first. He rolled it silently across his mind like a stone on the tongue. Useless. Not broken or resting. Just no longer needed. The idea came to him one spring morning as he stood in his shed staring at a half-finished stool. It was meant to be simple: 3 legs, a low seat, something sturdy enough for the mudroom. He had cut the pieces carefully the day before, but now, as he lifted the mallet, his shoulder flared with pain sharp enough to make him gasp. The mallet slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Amos stood there breathing hard, heart thudding louder than the sparrows in the rafters. For a long moment he did nothing. Then he sat down slowly on an overturned bucket and looked at his hands. They were the same hands, really: broad palms, knotted fingers, scars, faint and deep alike. Yet they felt foreign to him now, as if they belonged to another man, one who lived in the past and sometimes visited in mirrors. He did not finish the stool that day, or the next. By summer, the shed door stayed shut more often than not. People noticed, of course. In a place like Briar Hollow, absences had weight. People noticed, of course. In a place like Briar Hollow, absences had weight. "You're taking a well-earned rest," neighbors said kindly when they saw Amos walking the road instead of planing boards. But rest was not what Amos felt he was doing. Rest implied a return. This felt like being set gently, yet firmly, aside. He still rose early. Old habits did not surrender easily. At dawn, he brewed his coffee and sat at his kitchen table, listening to the world wake. The kettle hissed, the wind nudged the window panes, and somewhere a rooster tried earnestly to convince the sun to hurry. Amos would look at his tools hanging on the wall and think, what good am I now? The village didn't ask him to build anymore. Younger arms handled the heavy lifting. Faster minds sketched the plans. When a fence fell or a roof sagged, people nodded respectfully at Amos, but took their troubles elsewhere. He didn't blame them. He understood. But understanding did not soften the quiet. One afternoon in late August, Amos walked farther than usual, down past the last farmhouse to the old ash tree. The bench there was warm from the sun. He lowered himself onto it with care and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. From the bench, Briar Hollow spread out below him. Fields cut in neat rows, the river curling like a thought that hadn't decided where to end. Smoke lifting gently from chimneys. It was a view he had admired his whole life, but rarely paused to sit with. As he rested, he heard footsteps on the road. It was Ellie Parnell, carrying a basket of uneven apples and looking as if the world were asking more of her than she could give. She noticed Amos and hesitated. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not, Amos said, surprising himself how glad he was to say anything at all. Sit if you like. Ellie sat, setting her basket at her feet. For a while they said nothing. The ash leaves whispered overhead in the breeze. Finally she sighed. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Amos turned his head slightly but did not speak. My orchard, she continued. The trees are healthy, the rain's been decent enough, but the fruit won't set right. My father used to know what to do. I thought I did too, but everything I tried just makes it worse. She picked at the handle of her basket. I'm starting to think I'm not cut out for this. Amos felt an old familiar urge rise in him, the itch to stand up, to walk the orchard rows, to point, to prune, to show. But he swallowed it. Instead, he asked, Well, what have you tried? Ellie looked up, startled, and then began to speak. She talked of soil and seasons, of advice given too late, and decisions made too early, of the quiet fear she had inherited land, but not wisdom. Amos listened. He noticed how her shoulders loosened as she spoke, how her words slowed from a tumble to a steady stream. He noticed how often people explained their own answers aloud if only someone would give them room. When Ellie finished, Amos said, It sounds like you're paying attention. That counts for something. She considered this. Does it? It does, he said. Most mistakes come from not looking close enough. You're looking. You'll figure it out. Ellie smiled, a small but real smile. When she stood to go, she said, Thank you. I didn't expect that to help. Neither did I, Amos replied honestly. After she left, Amos remained on the bench a long time, watching the light shift. Something inside him, quiet as a seed under soil, stirred. Word travels in Briar Hollow the way water does, slowly at first, then all at once. Within a week, someone else stopped by the bench, then another. Some came with questions, some with worries they didn't know how to name. Others came with no purpose at all except to sit. Amos didn't offer solutions unless asked. He didn't tell stories of how things used to be unless someone wanted to hear them. Mostly, he listened. Listening, he discovered, was work of a different sort. It required patience, the kind that doesn't rush to fill silences. It required humility, the willingness to let another person arrive at their own understanding. It required attention, steady, deliberate, and full. One evening, Jonah Reed sat beside him and admitted he was afraid he had made a mistake marrying young and staying in the valley. Another morning, Mrs. Holloway spoke of loneliness so old it had become like the furniture, always there, but rarely acknowledged. A boy named Thomas confessed he thought he was weak because he didn't like hunting. Each time, Amos felt the same ache. I cannot fix this. And each time, he felt an answering realization. Perhaps fixing is not what's needed. Sometimes all he said was, "That sounds heavy." Sometimes he asked, "And how do you feel about that?" And sometimes he said nothing at all, letting the ash tree and the open sky bear witness alongside him. People left lighter than they arrived. Amos did not immediately. One night, unable to sleep, Amos returned to his shed. He lit the lamp and stood among his tools, breathing in the smell of wood and oil and old work. "I don't know who I am now," he said aloud to the empty room. And of course the tools didn't answer. He sat on the stool he'd never finished and bowed his head. "All my life," he continued, "I measured myself by what I could do: build, mend, carry. If I can't do those things, what's left?" A memory surfaced then, unbidden. His father, smoothing a plank with slow, careful strokes, had once said, "The worth of a thing isn't just in what it does, it's in what it allows." At the time, Amos had not understood. Now he thought of the bench, the conversations, the way people leaned into silence when it felt safe enough. He looked around the shed again, at the wood, waiting patiently, not angry that it hadn't yet become anything. "What do I allow?" Amos whispered. He stood, took a scrap of ashwood and planed it gently, not to build, but to feel the grain beneath his hand. Autumn came, and with it, change that no one had announced but everyone felt. The bench beneath the ash tree became a place people named without naming it. "I'll be by the tree," they'd say, or "You'll find him there." Amos arrived each morning after breakfast and left when the light began to thin. Some days were busy, some days no one came at all. On those quiet days, Amos worried the old fear might return. Instead, something else happened. He noticed wind patterns. He noticed how the clouds told the truth about coming rain if you learned how to look. He noticed his own thoughts, rising and falling without needing to be chased or captured. He began to understand that presence itself could be an offering. Winter tested this new understanding. Snow gathered thick on the bench, and Amos's joints protested the cold. He missed days when the road was impassable. He wondered if the bench was only a fair weather purpose, something that would fade with the frost. Then, one afternoon, a knock came at his door. It was Thomas, the boy that didn't like hunting. He stood on the porch, cheeks red from the cold. "Mr. Calder," he said, "could I sit inside just for a bit?" They sat by the stove. Thomas spoke haltingly of school, of expectations, of feeling invisible next to louder boys. Amos listened, the fire crackling softly beside them. Then, when the boy left, he carried nothing Amos could see. But he walked taller. And that night, Amos slept deeply. By spring, the stool in the shed was finished. Not because Amos needed it done, but because one afternoon his hands felt willing, and Amos didn't argue with them. The stool was uneven, one leg shorter than the others, so it wobbled. Amos smiled and set it beneath the ash tree next to the bench. He didn't fix the wobble. and soon someone always chose it. In time, Amos stopped thinking of himself as useless, not because he had become useful again, but because he learned that usefulness was too small a word for what was asked of him now. He was a listener, a guide, a guide who didn't walk the path for others, an encourager whose strength lay in saying, "You're not alone," a supporter steady as a bench under an old tree. And when Amos was gone, long after the ash had shed its last leaf and the bench had softened back into earth, something of him remained, in the way people learned to sit with one another, in the way silence became less frightening, in the way the village understood that not all work is done with hands and not all strength is visible. When the body loses its grip on what it once could do, the heart may open to what it was always meant to offer. Some purposes are built, others are simply given room.